and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Al Arabiya English. I'm Burges Watson, and coming up on today's programme, for an 11th consecutive day, Israel and Iran exchange hostilities. But after the US attacked Iranian nuclear sites on Sunday, Iran's armed forces are now threatening to inflict, quote, serious, unpredictable consequences on the United States. We ask, is this the end of US involvement in the conflict or the beginning? Where and what might Tehran target next? And just how vulnerable are US interests in the region looking right now? Hello and welcome. We begin with the latest on what's been day 11 in the exchange of hostilities between Israel and Iran. Well, on Sunday, the United States weighed into the conflict, striking Iranian nuclear sites. President Donald Trump says that the strikes had, quote, obliterated Iran's nuclear capabilities, though the full impact on Iran's nuclear program is not yet clear. Well, Israel says it struck the Fordo nuclear facility again today in order to obstruct access routes to the site. Well, today, the Israeli military says it has carried out fresh air raids in the heart of Tehran with what the country's defense minister, Israel Katz, described as unprecedented force. Well, one Israeli strike hit a power supply system, triggering temporary outages in the Iranian capital. Meanwhile, in Israel, there have been scenes of people rushing to bomb shelters in Tel Aviv, where sirens have been sounding. Blasts have also been reported in the skies above Jerusalem. Well, let's find out more now about Sunday's operation, which was codenamed Operation Midnight Hammer. We can speak to Matthew Buckley, who is a former US Navy Top Gun pilot who joins us from Florida. Thank you very much indeed for being with us here on Al Arabiya English. Can I just start by asking you a very basic question? I mean, what your observations are about how that operation was carried out in the early hours of Sunday morning?
Absolutely, Tom. Thank you for having me. A near flawless operation and just an incredible demonstration of American military power and resolve. These aircraft took off from the middle of the heartland, flew 36 hours-ish round trip, delivering ordnance on time, on target, and returning safely. And the number one mission objective on our end is always 10 fingers and 10 toes. Everybody came home safely. No injuries or reported issues on our end. And to be honest with you, it sounds like on the Iranian end, they claim that there wasn't anybody there or taken out. So in a military operation such as this, if both sides technically can suffer no losses, but the strategic objectives be met, that's a pretty successful mission in my book.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about these aircraft, the B-2 stealth bombers. I mean, a very long way from the Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, all the way to Iran, all the way back again. That's 36 hours of flying. What makes these planes so special?
Tom, these are the most elite, capable aircraft on the planet. These bombers are just full of technology, stealth technology, and capabilities. So there are two crew members in these aircraft. And I want to remind you that they are sitting on an ejection seat. This is not a first-class airline seat. This is a hard ejection seat. I think that my longest flight in the F-18 Hornet was just over 8 hours, and it was extremely painful. They do have a small cot or bed in there and a microwave to maybe cook a little food, but this is an incredibly challenging mission. So not only did they have to fly into enemy airspace and deliver some ordnance, they had to refuel, I think it was close to 5 times. And in-flight refueling has its own challenges, especially at night or bad weather. So incredibly capable aircraft, and it really does demonstrate that there isn't anywhere on the world that these aircraft can't hit, and the enemy most likely isn't going to see anything coming.
Okay, so we understand there were 7 of these planes used, each one with a crew of 2. Just to be clear, I mean, a really basic question, but can they not be detected by anyone at all?
So before the bombers entered Iranian airspace, Tom, one of the aircraft that I flew and some other American 5th-generation fighters did what is called a sweep. So in front of the bombers, we had some of our aircraft actually go in and jam the enemy radars, the enemy communication systems, and they also targeted those surface-to-air missiles. So before the B-2s even entered bad guy airspace, the Iranians were left even more blind and not able to target these aircraft. Even if they did see them, they wouldn't have been able to return fire. But the B-2s, when they are flying their stealth profile, nobody's going to see them. You're not going to be able to see those on radar. But as I just alluded to, the Iranian radar was down and not operational.
Right, and they fly just below the speed of sound. I'm told that people communicate very little en route using those planes amongst each other, because there were 7 of these planes, as part of the strategy to obviously avoid detection. Does that sound right to you, that they probably weren't talking to each other too much unless strictly necessary?
So, Tom, one of the reasons that we brief these missions is that we can knock these out, calm out, or little, no communications at all. The only time we're talking over the radio during a mission like this is if or when something goes wrong. If everything's going as briefed, there's no need to talk over the radio. And obviously, Tom, there are a lot of sensors and communication equipment aboard the aircraft where we're getting messages to and from each other without having to transmit over the radio. And these are secure messages. For example, a lot of the fighter aircraft with their radar looking downrange, they can data link that picture back to the bombers. We call it over the horizon capabilities. So all of these airplanes are actually talking to each other. They might just not be using their voice.
And obviously, as the name implies, this operation took place under the cover of darkness, Operation Midnight Hammer, just a reminder to our viewers. I mean, why was that an important element of it? I mean, clearly that added to the surprise, did it?
Yes. So, Tom, the United States and most of our NATO allies are some of the only countries that can operate near flawlessly at night with night vision goggles, sensors. Obviously, you have a tactical advantage operating at night. But, Tom, after talking to some of my buddies and looking at the operational, what happened operationally, they could have done this in broad daylight and they would have had the same results. It didn't matter day or night, but obviously night's going to give us a little bit more of a tactical advantage.
Did you ever have to carry out operations like this? Perhaps you're not allowed to say, but did you ever carry an operation under the cover of darkness? And what sort of challenges does that represent?
Step one, Tom, don't hit anything. I sadly, during my naval aviation career, I had one of my good buddies. We had a midair collision at night during training. He had the night vision goggles on, kind of got task saturated, and he just flew right into another fighter. He doesn't even know he's dead at this time. But the technology has come a lot farther where we know where all of our squadron mates and our wingmen are on a strike like this. So technology is rapidly improved, but at night in combat, Tom, the hair on the back of your neck is standing up. You are literally on the edge of your seat. All of your senses are heightened, and it's a pretty sporty environment. But Tom, we have a saying: you fight like you train, and you train like you fight. At Top Gun, I graduated from Top Gun back in the day. If we go anywhere in the world and we're surprised or we're outgunned, our training failed. So this mission almost should have been a letdown. These bomber crews trained to do this mission repeatedly. They actually go into the simulator building and do 24-hour missions in the cockpit, but it's sitting there on the ground in the simulator building. So I guarantee you they flew this mission multiple times before they ever got airborne for real. And it was almost a letdown, probably when they landed, like, wow, that went better than expected. Because remember, we contingency plan. In the planning process, what happens if somebody gets shot down over Iran or enemy airspace? Who's going to conduct the search and rescue? What if one of our refueling tankers goes down at this point? So the planning process is so in depth that when things go according to plan, it's a little shocking to us because we overplanned for things not to go our way.
We understand those B-2 stealth bombers spent about 25 minutes around the sites of the targets. I mean, were those the most dangerous phases of their journey, would you say, those 25 minutes?
Absolutely, Tom. Whenever you're releasing ordnance, whenever you're dropping weapons off your airplane, that's first of all, that's when you're the most vulnerable. Whenever these B-2s or any stealth aircraft kind of open their bomb bays, that's when you're actually visible to radar. So that is the most dangerous portion of the flight. But going into bad guy country and dropping the bombs and leaving, that entire time was absolutely dangerous. But the most dangerous part would have been weapons release. Absolutely. That's when their stealth mode is the most compromised.
Okay, and you mentioned the weapons there, these bunker busters, extremely powerful bombs, which only the United States has. Just tell us a bit more about that weaponry. I mean, what can you tell us about them and what makes them so extraordinary as weapons?
In the United States, we look at the potential threats, and then we're going to build a weapon and an aircraft or a delivery system. And these MOPs, massive ordnance penetrators, were designed specifically for these nuclear facilities. And we're talking years. I'll be honest with you, Tom, when I was flying my Operation No-Fly Zone missions over Iraq, that was boring. That was a known entity. When we were down on the carrier during our downtime, all of our mission planning was towards Iran. So back in the day, we said, well, if the Iranians are going to bury this stuff underground, we're going to need a weapon to do it. And the fusing on these weapons are just absolutely incredible. They can actually sense what they're going through. I'm going through dirt. Now I'm going through concrete. You can actually program the fuses to sense different materials and to only detonate after it gets to a certain point. The technologies on these weapons are just absolutely insane.
And did the Iranians try firing back, as far as you can understand?
No, I know General Kane. I know Raisin from back in the day. He's a great American and an even better fighter pilot. But I'm going to take him at his word because I know him and I trust the man with my life. He said not a single bullet, not a single surface-to-air missile, no enemy airplane got airborne. This just, like I said, they didn't even know we were there, Tom, until those bombs hit and we were gone.
Okay, and just lastly, Matthew, I mean, how would you sum up the overall operation, how it went, and just tell us what you think those pilots would have done the minute they got back to base?
Well, the operation clearly was a success. Nobody was injured on our end. All the aircraft got back safely, and the targets were destroyed. We're still going to need a couple days to do BDA, battle damage assessment. So that'll take some time to really figure out if these were totally destroyed, as the president said. It'll take a little bit more time. But Tom, flying around the world and dropping some weapons on some bad guys and coming home safely, first thing I would have done would have been hugging my wife and kids and thanking God for a successful mission. And there isn't, Tom, I didn't fly with a single pilot or aviator in the United States military who wanted war, who looked forward to any of this. As a matter of fact, people like me want to avoid conflict. Why? Because we're the ones on the tip of the spear doing this. So if anything, we pray for peace and not to have to use and resort to combat to settle our differences. I mean, war is the ultimate failure of the human condition, and I don't want it. I guarantee you none of those B-2 bombers pilots wanted it, but we joined for a reason. And if the commander-in-chief delivers those orders that something needs to be done, we're going to salute and get it done.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Really appreciate it. Matthew Buckley, former US Navy Top Gun pilot. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Meanwhile, the US President Donald Trump says he is still interested in a diplomatic solution to this situation. Well, top officials in Washington have repeatedly insisted that the US goal is not regime change in Iran. But President Trump also says that Iranians should overthrow their government if it refuses to negotiate on its nuclear program. So what diplomatic solution could be negotiated? And what are the chances of a change of leadership there in Iran? Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Edward Djerejian, who's a former US ambassador to Israel, also a senior fellow at the Harvard Belfer Center, who served as Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs. He joins us now from France. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, Ambassador. President Trump saying today that he is still open to diplomacy. I mean, what form do you see diplomacy taking at this stage?
Well, at this stage, it's very problematic because in the wake of the Israeli attacks and the United States attacks on against Iranian nuclear targets, the Iranians are determining now what their response should be. And the Iranian officials, especially the foreign minister, has made the statement that Iran will not enter negotiations under either military pressure or even political pressure. So we're at a standstill for the moment in terms of the initiation of, if you will, diplomatic efforts. But again, the immediate issue is whether or not Iran is going to militarily respond to the United States attacks on its nuclear facilities and what form that might take, which will then obviously outline what the future options are.
Yeah, I mean, just staying with diplomacy for a little while longer, I mean, the Iranian Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, has been meeting today with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. I'm just wondering what they might be seeking to achieve.
Well, there's a traditional relationship, as you know, between Russia and Iran. And Russia, of course, they have this structural relationship with the Bushehr civilian nuclear facility in Iran. And Iran has military, political, and some economic ties with Russia. So it's an important relationship. But how Putin plays that is going to be quite interesting, because he made a very curious statement the other day that Israel has many Russian-speaking citizens, and therefore Russia has also interest in Israel. So we're going to see what comes out of this this meeting. Of course, Russia has condemned the attacks on Iran, but we'll see whether Putin, given his challenges in Ukraine and the ongoing war there, whether he has the wherewithal to really get, if I could use the word, materially involved in the Iranian crisis.
Right, so you don't seem to be making it sound like it's very likely, in your opinion, that President Putin will decide that now is the moment to step in and help an ally in need.
Right. I think he'll offer some sort of mediation role. I think he's already done that. But yeah, how effective that would be, given a Washington stance, we'll have to see.
I mean, obviously, the Trump administration, many in Washington, wouldn't be at all averse to a change of leadership in Iran. But they say that's not the goal. Having said that, I mean, when you look at the president's messages on social media, I mean, the messages are a little bit mixed, aren't they?
They really are. And it's really confusing to anyone who's trying to follow the policy directions from Washington and even at Israel, because both countries have basically stated that the goal of all of this is to focus on Iran's nuclear capabilities and to not allow it to have a nuclear weapons capability. Then you see all sorts of commentary and, if you could say, different themes emerging. And the latest thing on social media that President Trump put out, he said he just coined MEGA, Make Iranian Great Again. If the Iranians want to make Iran great again, they'll forego their nuclear ambitions and sit down and talk. But then he also, in the same message, social media message, used the word regime change. And you see Vice President J.D. Vance, who made it very clear the other day that American policy is not based on regime change in Iran. And yet you have these various interpretations that bring a great deal of ambiguity. And I think this is very, very importantly dangerous, frankly, because we need strategic clarity. Especially, this is a very dangerous moment in the Middle East and globally. And we need strategic clarity, especially from the United States, on what the end game is. Is the end game the nuclear capabilities alone? Or is the end game regime change? Or is it something else? And the messages that are coming out are confusing. Now, they may be deliberately doing that, but I don't see what good end that serves.
Yeah, I mean, it is confusing. I mean, do you think that toppling the Iranian government is even considered to be a likely scenario by serious Iran observers, or do you think this is just a bit of wishful thinking by a handful of people, perhaps in Washington, perhaps a handful of people in Israel?
Well, I think there are some who consider a regime change, quote unquote, collateral damage. If you focus on the nuclear capabilities, but if this leads to regime change, that's a good outcome also. But that's flippant. That's not policy. That's gambling. And my personal view is, and having served 8 American administrations and presidents from John F. Kennedy to Bill Clinton, I think in terms of U.S. national security interests, given our experience, the American experience in Vietnam, in Afghanistan, and in Iraq, for example, in Afghanistan, it was a just war after 9/11, but then we stayed for 20 years. It became a forever war. And what's the outcome? The Taliban is back in power. That is a failure of policy. And then if you look at Iraq in 2003, yes, we did get rid of Saddam Hussein. He was a bad actor, but that led to great disruption in the Middle East and the creation of ISIS and heightened the whole counterterrorism challenge that the region and the world faced. So getting involved in yet another Middle East war, to me, would not serve United States national security interests. And we're on the edge of that now.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, you and others are making it sound a bit like this administration is slightly improvising. There's a bit of shooting from the hip going on here. But on the other hand, we're being told that there's a clever game of smoke and mirrors going on here. President Trump looked reluctant to get the US involved at the outset, although perhaps that was part of a smokescreen. We were told there was a bit of a rift between him and Benjamin Netanyahu, although that was, again, potentially part of a smokescreen as well. I mean, how much is this shooting from the hip and how much is this clever smokescreen strategy?
Well, some of it is shooting from the hip. Some of it is very deliberate in the modus operandi of President Trump. As you know, he likes to put out, may we call it extreme positions that sort of have shock value on whoever his interlocutors are, somehow softening them up, and then coming in with a compromise proposal after they've been softened up and try to make a deal. So there is in terms of President Trump's modus operandi and how he makes deals, there's some rationale to it. But this is not a real estate deal. This is geopolitics. These are issues of war and peace. These are issues of the stability of a very important part of the world. And therefore, there should be a very coherent policy. And I would think that given what's just happened in the last few days, the military activities we've discussed, I think the focus now should be, how do we get the parties to the negotiating table? How do we get the United States and Iran to the negotiating table on a nuclear deal, somewhat akin to the JCPOA, but a much better deal? And Trump would insist on that for the obvious reasons. And I think that's the wise thing to do. But to get the parties to a negotiating table for monitoring, surveilling, controlling a much more diminished Iranian nuclear capability today. So I think in all this crisis, there is also an opportunity, despite how bleak things look now. But let me just say this. We may be entering the fog of war. And that's very dangerous. And you don't know where that can go out. And you've seen the speculation what can happen, whether there are attacks on the U.S. bases or U.S. personnel, or there are attacks on Iran's Arab neighbors, or Iran blocks somehow the Straits of Hormuz, on and on. But we are on the edge of entering the fog of war, and therefore there has to be strategic clarity. And I don't see that.
Sure. I mean, on the one hand, you and many in America sound like, negotiation should be the next step from here. But I mean, the Israelis, let's face it, and you were US ambassador to Israel, so perhaps you can tell us. I mean, they never liked that Iran deal that was struck by the Obama administration. They don't really seem to want another deal that's not particularly different from that previous 2015 deal. I mean,
Right.
President Trump is being pulled in two directions, isn't he? There'll be those in America who say, look, we mustn't get sucked into another war. Diplomacy has to be the right way to go. And yet the Israelis don't seem to have a huge amount of appetite for that kind of diplomacy, do they?
Well, the Israelis have a very, especially under Prime Minister Netanyahu, we've seen that in Gaza, sort of total victory, the militarization of diplomacy, if I can put it that way. What does that mean? There's been a great debate in Israel on the day after in Gaza. And Netanyahu has never outlined what his concept of the day after in Gaza would be. He just says total victory, eliminate Hamas, and he uses two phrases, demilitarization and de-radicalization of Gaza. Well, that's a tactic. That's not a strategy. What should the day after be? Is anyone talking about the Israeli-Palestinian issue and trying to prepare the groundwork in the future for negotiations to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is really at the core of what we're talking about? All of this started on October 7th by Hamas's brutal attack on Israelis. But this led to the conflicts we've seen in Lebanon, with Hezbollah, in Syria, with the Houthis, etc., and now with Iran as a sponsor of the so-called axis of resistance. So we're forgetting what the strategic framework is of all of this also. Who's talking about Palestine today?
Sure, no one.
And yet, there's no coherent strategy putting all these pieces together. Frankly, if I could put it this way, I would like to see my country, the United States, start playing chess in the Middle East and not checkers.
I mean, you've alluded to the fact that we're in a very dangerous situation right now. I mean, let's help us understand that. What sort of dangers, what sort of worst case scenarios are you envisaging?
Well, I think the worst case scenario is if Iran decides, after the American attacks and after the continuing Israeli military operations, to respond in some sort of kind and target American bases, target American military officials, or try to block the Strait of Hormuz, as you know, which provides approximately 30% of the flow of energy to the world. This would raise the price of oil up. I don't know how much, but certainly it would be veering toward the hundreds of dollars a barrel. And what impact will that have on various countries and energy security? That's one thing. Will the Iranians try to use some of their surrogates, even though they're weakened, for example, in Iraq, to strike at American personnel bases there? Et cetera, et cetera. Or will the Iranians go for a dirty bomb? They still have enriched uranium, and they still have the knowledge, the nuclear physicists, the engineers, the scientists who know how to make a bomb. So will they go for a bomb? Because they still have enough enriched uranium to do that. So these are some of the worst case scenarios that can occur. And then how will that drag in other parties in the region? Our friends and allies in the Middle East, the Gulf countries, our European allies. So again, we are in a very dangerous threshold. The situation could go in any direction. But that's why I say that there needs to be a sense and a real sense of strategic clarity as to what the end game is here.
Sure. I mean, just lastly, obviously very easy to start wars, not quite so easy to win them or end them. I mean, just lastly, I mean, your final thoughts. I mean, supposing US lives are lost, let's imagine a scenario in which Iran, like the ones you just described, Iran goes after US interests, whether it's military bases or other targets. What will be the domestic repercussions, do you think, for President Trump in that sort of a scenario?
Well, that's where, when I talk about the fog of war, that's where an American president is really put. His back will be to the wall. If Americans are killed, then he must respond. And the United States will then necessarily get involved more and more into military operations in the Middle East. And where will that lead? Where will that lead? That to me is a very dangerous situation, and I just hope that the Iranians are not that suicidal that they will target American bases or officials, but will do some sort of repost to show that they're retaliating against being so badly hit, and then start opening up to diplomatic initiatives. I hope that's the way out. But if there are American casualties, the American president will be hard put not to do something even more definitive than what's been done.
All right. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. It's been really interesting. Ambassador Edward Djerejian, thank you so much for your time, sir.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Well, ever since President Trump joined Israel's campaign on Sunday morning by targeting Iranian nuclear sites, Iran has been threatening to retaliate. Well, until now, Tehran has continued firing missiles at Israel and has so far not taken action against the United States or US regional interests. Even so, Iran's armed forces are today threatening to inflict serious, unpredictable consequences on the United States in retaliation for its strikes on those nuclear sites in Isfahan, Natanz, and Fordow. Well, Iran's supreme leader says that bases used by US forces in the region and elsewhere could be attacked. And the US State Department has issued a worldwide caution for Americans. So just what could Iran have in mind? Well, for more, we can speak now to Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry, who is a former NATO commander and strategic forecaster. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, sir. Let me just start by asking you a very simple question. Do you think President Trump was right to order those strikes on Iran in the early hours of Sunday morning?
I think looking at it from the point of view of today, yes, I think he was right. I think everybody had run out of road, frankly. The negotiations were going nowhere. There was a lot of ambiguity about the Iranian nuclear program. And frankly, the Israelis were starting to think there was an existential crisis brewing for them as a country and as a people. One can't tell how these things will roll out downstream. But at the moment, the Americans have the initiative. They're able to say to the Iranians, look, you can either negotiate or we'll do something else as well. And let's be clear, the Americans are saying we're doing this as Americans, not just as allies of the Israelis.
And, we were talking a little earlier on with the guests about the operation itself and how it was conducted under the cover of darkness. Any thoughts on how that long-distance operation was conducted in the early hours of Sunday morning?
Well, actually, it's a remarkable exercise of global projection of power. If you think about what happened, they set up the operation whereby the aircraft would fly from continental United States, a 37-hour round trip with all the refueling that entails. They put in place a very good deception program as well. They had sort of the same type of aircraft flying through the Asia Pacific to Guam. And in fact, they attacked the other way from, as I said, continental United States. They achieved complete surprise. I thought they were going to go Thursday night, Friday morning. But in fact, as you saw, they went Saturday night, Sunday morning. But a flawless operation and what we expect from a top-class military that knows how to do this.
And what do we expect from Iran? I mean, Iran's armed forces chief vowing, quote, firm action and everlasting consequences. I mean, what are Iran's options and which of them sound most likely?
I think Iran's in a very weak position at the moment. We're seeing a lot of bluster, not only in the public space, but also on social media. There's a lot of exaggeration in the rhetoric. To me, that is the sign of weakness, not of strength. I suspect right now Iran is thinking about the long-term consequences, whether the regime can survive this. It's probably consulting with its allies as well, Russia and China. And China, of course, has a particular interest in the particularly the oil and also the gas that comes out of Iran and goes to China. They will be looking for stability, not only of the regime or indeed the transition if that happens, and also, of course, energy prices. So they'll be looking very closely to see how much disruption there'll be. So in consulting with their allies, the Iranians will want to calibrate their response. And I think that'll be anything from continuing to pound Israel with ballistic missiles and drones, right through to performative stuff, which hits American bases that don't have many people on. I think what they will fear is a massive American retaliation where they can't engage their allies, they can't respond themselves, and it really does threaten the regime.
Do you see any of Iran's allies, you mentioned China and Russia there, stepping in and giving Iran a hand?
I think Russia's not in a position to do that. It's very weak from an economic point of view. It's also tied down quite significantly in Ukraine right now. So it doesn't have a lot to spare in either material or human terms. I suspect they'll be providing some intelligence. That will be the thing that the Russians will provide. We should note also there are two very capable Chinese intelligence ships in the vicinity of the Gulf and the Gulf of Oman right now. They'll be hoovering in all sorts of data, electronic signatures, things like that, and passing them on to the Iranians. And we shouldn't underestimate how close the Chinese are to the Iranians in financial, commercial, energy, and indeed personal terms. A lot of the senior echelons of the Chinese PLA, People's Liberation Army, know their opposite numbers or knew them before they were assassinated. And that's a very close relationship. So I think the Iranians will be saying right now, any step that we take, we've got to look at how it affects us, the regime. Secondly, the international stage, and by extension, our partners. And thirdly, what we're going to get in return, because I don't think President Trump, having actually made the very brave decision, whether it was sensible or not, we'll find out downstream, the very brave decision will still be in the mood to do things that are decisive.
Are there any non-military options that Iran might go for? I mean, people are talking about the closure of the Straits of Hormuz. I don't know how impactful you think that would be.
Well, Tom, it would be very impactful. There's no doubt about it. But we've got to bear in mind that America only gets 7% of its oil from the Gulf. China gets 48%. And it'll be very difficult to close the straits. The Americans will immediately deal with any coercive or military operations that are going in the Gulf. The Omanis will probably keep their territorial seas open, so there's a southern route out there as well. And it's in nobody's interest, least of all the Iranians, to tell you the truth, to shut the Straits of Hormuz. And there are all sorts of ways around it. I'm old enough to remember the tanker war of the 1980s. And the Americans simply said, look, we'll flag every vessel as an American vessel that goes through the Straits. If you dare touch it, then, of course, there'll be massive retaliation. I suspect that will be the same again. I think what's different today, Tom, is you've got underwater drones, you've got surface drones, you've got semi-submersibles, which the Iranians have got. So there's a lot of deniability if you want to attack merchant ships or indeed warships. And we've seen in the Black Sea, the Ukrainians using drones, how hostile that environment can be for warships. But you've got to be careful of what you're going up against. If you are going up against the United States Navy, Air Force, and everything they've got, then you're going to have to come pretty well armed.
Indeed. I mean, some people won't know the significance of the Straits of Hormuz. I mean, obviously a very narrow waterway. But you seem to be suggesting that there would be ways around it were Iran to opt for that sort of course of action.
There's no doubt there are ways around it. As I said, the Straits have two sides. It's a very difficult passage. I've been there a lot myself. Indeed, I've been involved in operations to keep the Straits open. We should be in no doubt the Americans would bring massive firepower to bear on any attempt to close the Straits. And as I said, half of the Straits are owned by Oman anyway. So the Deepwater Channel goes through both Iranian and Omani territorial seas. And I suspect that the southern part of the Gulf in particular will be very interested in assisting to keep the waterway open. It would be a very foolish move, I think, by the Iranians. I think my own view is if you look at where they're strong, they'll look at possibly terrorism in the wider world. They'll look to try and take out Israeli and American assets where they can without risk. I suspect there's going to be a lot of performative action just to say, look, we're still in the game. Don't write us off yet. To my mind, the biggest worry for anybody in the regime is regime change. So anything that destabilizes the regime and offers a reasonable transition to something that the Chinese, the Russians, and everybody else can put up with is what I would fear most if I were either a member of the IRGC or of the regime.
I mean, there are 40,000 US troops here in the Middle East. I mean, you seem to be suggesting that perhaps US interests in the region could be targeted by Iran. I mean, do you think that's likely? Do you think Iran would take that risk? Because let's face it, were Iran to do such a thing, that really would bring the United States back into this conflict in a very major way, I should think.
Well, it depends. I mean, desperate people do desperate things. And if they were thinking their regime might change, they might go for using everything they've got to inflict as much damage as they can on American and allied bases and also on Israel as well. But I think in that case, you're going to see a lot of devastation coming back the other way. And that would mean regime change. There's no question about that. If I'm a senior member of the Iranian regime now, I'm thinking about my personal and institutional survival. So that will drive any retaliation that the Iranians might think about. I mean, there's a wider security threat in the Gulf, of course, even in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, despite the investments which we know Iran has offshore. There might be some performative action to say, look, we can bring anybody in if we like. And so people need to be on their guard. And the Americans will be very careful to protect their allies, their investments and their friends on the lower side of the Gulf. I have no doubt about that.
So do you think it's fair to say where we are right now in this conflict is that how Iran responds to what the US did on Sunday will ultimately determine where we go to from here? I mean, essentially, is the ball really entirely in Iran's court here?
Yes, it is. I mean, it's an interesting image. I mean, the ball is on their side of the net. It's whether they choose to hit it back again or simply concede the point. I mean, there are problems for the Ayatollah Khomeini both ways. If he shows weakness, then within the regime, he will lose power and people will lose credibility as well. If he hits back in the wrong way, then he risks almost the same thing happening, but from external situation. I mean, Tom, what I think we have to bear in mind here, and it's something I've said for a long time now in my writings, is that most wars are caused by windows of opportunity and windows of weakness. And at the moment, you've got Iran really having a window of decided weakness, having its proxies basically wiped out by Israel and having this devastating attack on its nuclear facilities. And of course, there's a window of opportunity to deal with the Iranian regime such that the future of Iran is different. So coming together, that sort of thing is very dangerous for Iran in these circumstances. I mean, there's no doubt that the nuclear program was unsupportable by a large swathe of countries throughout the world. There was nothing happening with negotiations. All the agreements that had taken place basically had examples of cheating around the edges. It was going nowhere. Decisive action has been taken. If it were me, but I'm not Iranian, I'd be saying, right, how can we work this to make sure that we can secure a future for ourselves as a regime, but also not lose too much face?
I mean, if this conflict does get broadened and more players are somehow forced to join in, I mean, who do you see being drawn into a future broader conflict? I mean, would the UK, for example, step up and support the United States and Israel in their action?
I think that's open to question right now, and it depends very much on how the present government perceives the UK's long-term interests. I think if you could prove Article 5 in relation to a NATO context where an attack on one is an attack on all, then the United Kingdom, I'm sure, would step up and probably support America in basically defending itself. I think if there were a broader campaign to either destabilize the Iranian regime or take down even more of its conventional capability, then I think that would be a coalition of the willing, and the Americans would probably say, right, this is a problem that needs dealing with. We'll know who our friends are afterwards, so who wants to come along with us to deal with this situation? I think it's much more fluid than it used to be, to tell you the truth. And NATO in particular would be very keen to say, look, unless it's an Article 5 issue, then people support America if they think it's in their interests. If they don't think it's in their interest, they won't. But be in no doubt, a country that is led by President Trump will remember its friends and, of course, despise the people that don't actually help it.
Yeah, I mean, the United Kingdom keeping fairly quiet on this. I mean, sort of the usual sorts of language about watching the situation and some degree of alarm. But where do you see the UK heading to? What do you think the UK position is exactly?
Well, I can't speak for the government, Tom, but from where I'm sitting, it seems to me the government is looking to actually get the benefits of what America is doing without any of the liabilities. And they're being very careful to say, well, it wasn't us, it was the Americans. There is an advantage to that, though. It means they're in a position to be an honest broker, if you like, or be in a position as a permanent member of the UN Security Council to say, look, we can help actually get a ceasefire here and we can actually get some sort of agreement and negotiation going forward. But right now, it feels odd, to tell you the truth, to be in a United Kingdom that isn't supporting the United States in what is a fairly straightforward issue. Is Iran going to have a nuclear device, which threatens all of us? So unusual. So we're in new territory. We'll see what happens. But as I said, America will remember its friends in these circumstances.
And just lastly, I mean, does it sound to you, does it look to you from what you've seen and heard as though the United States has succeeded in, as President Trump says, obliterating Iran's nuclear program, or is it still too early to say?
I think it's too early to say. All I can say is that anywhere else that had been devastated like that would find that its nuclear program had been significantly derailed for a number of years. One has to take into account also the fact that quite a lot of the nuclear scientists have been killed as well in Israeli attacks. So that's not a program that any country can actually sustain without having some effect on the overall program. Do I think there is some fissile material stored somewhere? Yes, I think there is. Do I think there's the capacity within a year or so to produce either a dirty bomb or a low-level yield device? Yes, I think there probably is. But they're probably going to need some help. And I think the free world and America will be looking very carefully to see who might offer that help, because obviously that's a very serious issue.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry, thank you for your time, sir. Well, let's get more now. We can speak to retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt, who's a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for the Middle East and former Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs. He joins us from Washington. Thank you very much indeed for being with us once again here on Al Arabiya English. I'd just like to start by asking you what your immediate reaction was when you found out that the US had carried out those somewhat long threatened strikes on the United States. Did it take you by surprise?
Well, I certainly was surprised. I was somewhat shocked that we did that. And to use that great British term, I was a little bit gobsmacked. So it was something that I was surprised by. But I could see the logic behind it because the president had said, we'll give 2 weeks for negotiation. And my initial thought was, what's left to negotiate?
Right, so it took you by surprise, and obviously took many others by surprise, presumably including the Iranians. What are your overall thoughts on how the operation was executed?
Well, first of all, I've been in government for 40 years. I've never seen operational security that tight. I think the tactical deception was somewhat unnecessary since we own the skies, but the strategic deception by the president, I have to tip a hat. I haven't seen that in my lifetime.
You're quoted as saying this operation had some of the Trump hallmarks to it. The exact quote is that it was a bit like a Trump deal, you're quoted as saying. I mean, do correct me if I'm misquoting you, but why did you say that? What made it different?
Well, it goes back to the negotiations. We have been negotiating with Iran over its nuclear program, which that attack put a severe turn it back quite a bit, very much so. The Israelis are continuing to attack. So, I mean, we've been negotiating on a horse, but the horse is dead. So what's left to negotiate?
Obviously, the strikes that were carried out on these uranium enrichment sites, like the one in Fordo. Is this something that's dangerous just by virtue of the fact that nuclear sites are being destroyed? I mean, could there be dust clouds? Could there be radiation? I mean, are there any dangers associated with this?
Well, I don't think so, because we use bunker busters. If you take a look at those holes that went into the ground, they're relatively small for a bombing campaign. And if they did their job, I would suspect that they rubbled the inside of the facility. And when you have that much containment, that's probably the best way to make sure that no radiation escapes.
And we heard President Trump saying that those sites are being, quote, totally obliterated. I mean, what's your understanding? Because obviously we've had a bit longer to sort of take stock of what happened, but what's your understanding of the level of damage that's been inflicted?
Well, first of all, in 30 years in the military, I've never heard that military term obliterated before. I'd go with what General Kane said the next day, severely damaged. But how severe, how damaged, we really won't know until we've finished a formal bomb damage assessment, which is typical for bombing campaigns and artillery campaigns. You don't know what you hit. You don't know how much you destroyed. You need to get that intelligence. It could come from communications intelligence, signals intelligence, digital intelligence to see what's coming, what the Iranians are saying. You can use satellite intelligence, and all that intelligence is fused so that the briefers can tell the commander-in-chief. It's our put in percentage estimation that the current operational level of that facility is put in another percentage. And the answer is, based on that information, you're instructing the commander, or you're giving the advice to the commander whether you need to reattack that target.
Sure, indeed. We don't know if there is any need at this stage for a reattack. In terms of Iran's options moving forward, I mean, what do you think is the most likely way in which the Iranians will respond to what happened on Sunday?
Well, let's first talk about how the Iranians could respond. They really have three capabilities. They can use their missiles, they can use the Iranian-backed militias in the region, or they can use terrorism, all of which they've done before. Missiles, we saw them use missiles as a response to the targeting of Qasem Soleimani in 2020. They shot 12 ballistic missiles to an American base in Iraq, al-Assad, wounding quite a few of our soldiers. Thank God they didn't kill any. Militias, we've been attacked by militias for years and years. Again, right after the Qasem Soleimani targeting, they actually got inside the U.S. Embassy, and luckily there was no damage done there. They were quickly pushed out. They've used terrorism for years. They're one of the great worldwide sponsors of terrorism, starting with the Hezbollah attack on the U.S. Embassy and the U.S. Marine Barracks in '82, to as most recently as they have sent a hit team to try to kill the UAE ambassador in a fancy restaurant in Washington, D.C. So I think those are the three capabilities. Which they will choose, we don't know. We certainly have the force protection in place for the first and second abroad. And Deputy FBI Director Kash Patel has put out a warning for a threat of terrorism inside the United States. So we'll wait and see.
And how would the U.S. respond in the event of an attack on U.S. interests, whatever form that took?
Yeah, I think the president's been quite clear on that, which is if you respond to our attack, there will be a counter response that is far more severe, far more lethal than anything the Israelis have imposed so far.
President Trump calling the Supreme Leader a, quote, easy target. He also says there are no current plans to assassinate him. But I mean, do you think that might change? I mean, why would he be saying that?
Oh, I think, look, let's understand what we have in the way of leaders. You have a determined, focused like a laser Israeli prime minister, and you've got an unpredictable U.S. president. That's the worst enemy that the Ayatollah could be facing. Whether it's rhetoric on the part of the president or if he intends to go through with it. Look, he said he was going to give the Iranians 2 weeks, and he attacked after 3 days. Statements like that demonstrate Winston Churchill's old adage. The truth is so important in war that it needs to be protected by a bodyguard of lies. And Trump has proven in the past he's a great liar, and he could very well be lying now.
But in terms of assassinating a head of state or a senior figure in a foreign government, I mean, some people would be extremely uncomfortable with that, even as a threat. I mean, it does set some dangerous precedents, doesn't it?
Well, it certainly does, but I would rather that uncomfortable precedent of assassinating a foreign leader. I certainly prefer that to the launching of a nuclear weapon that would have devastating consequences in the region.
I mean, President Trump has looked and sounded quite reluctant to get involved from the get-go, really, with regards to this particular conflict. I mean, but do you see it as being inevitable that the United States will get more involved?
Depends on what you mean by more involved. Are we going to declare war on Iran and turn this this one-time attack, this one-and-done attack at Fordow and Esfahan into a major land conflict? I don't think so. Could there be some tit-for-tat attacks between the Islamic Republic and the United States? Possibly. The president says he is reluctant to start wars. He doesn't start wars. He finishes wars. But at the same time, he's going to do whatever he needs to do as president of the United States to protect America and our allies. So that's the great contradiction. And that's where you see the conflict between the true believers on the right who are taking the president literally and the antagonists, the opposition on the left, who look for any reason to criticize the president, even if he's doing what they would want him to be doing.
But even in his own camp, isn't this quite risky for President Trump, politically speaking?
Well, politically, for risk, what risk does he have? This is his last term. He doesn't need to be worried about re-election. It's probably inevitable, as so happens in the American political system, that he's going to lose the House or the Senate in the midterms. I just don't see how this affects President Trump's ability to carry out his duties until the end of his presidency, whether his antagonists want him to or not.
A deeply divided party, is that not, I mean, at the very least, highly inconvenient, and at the worst, I mean, you know, he could be dealing with a mutiny in the ranks of the GOP, couldn't he?
Well, we've lost one so far, McCarran, but Fetterman, the Democrat from Pennsylvania, is all in on support for the president on this. So I don't think that either party wants this to go into some sort of vote inside the United States Congress for the obvious political ramifications it would have. Voting against President Trump on, quote, constitutional grounds because he didn't go to seek a declaration of war from the Congress. We haven't had a declaration of war since the Second World War. He violated the War Powers Act. No, he didn't violate the War Powers Act. He has 60 days to report to Congress on this. So those that oppose and try to, through Congress, get some sort of bill or resolution that will inevitably, particularly in the Senate, be voted down, will just expose the opposition as it will allow the opposition to be painted as anti-American, anti-Semitic. It's too easy a give for the Trump supporters. You look at McCarran, the one Republican who's complaining, the president has already set up a political action committee to primary him out. So inside the United States Congress, I think that they get a lot of television time, but they don't really get a lot of stuff done.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, what's the way out of this? What happens next, and what needs to be done to make sure that these hostilities come to a swift conclusion? Where do you see things heading?
Well, I certainly don't think it's more military action. I certainly don't think it's regime change. I think it's offering the Iranians a gentle off-ramp that starts with a negotiated position where the Iranians come in with a position, a precondition that says we are willing to abandon our nuclear program and subject that abandonment to verification and inspection. I mean, what else? Why would the Americans sit down and talk to the Iranians at this point? The Iranians have lost all of their leverage, all of this passing notes between intermediaries and not sitting down face to face. Those days are over. So the answer is continue to severely degrade the Iranian nuclear program, send clear messages to Iran that we are willing to negotiate, subject to a precondition of abandoning the nuclear program. And we can talk about how we can help with that, lift sanctions, help with economic assistance, help with financial assistance, and let's get Iran back into the family of nations where they're no longer a threat to their neighbors.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time, but thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt, thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you very much.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.